Here's some of the worst theology I've ever heard. And again, the way that we know bad theology from good theology, from true theology rather, is whether or not it causes us to trust God, because trust is the doorway into love, and we need to trust Him in order to be in love with Him, and being in love with Him is His ultimate goal, i.e. the greatest commandment in all of the Bible from the beginning to the end is always love with God. Therefore, any theology that causes you to not trust Him is bad theology. So, here's today's bad theology. There are those out there who propound or put forth the notion that we were all somewhere before we were born, and deciding how and in what circumstances and situations we would come to earth in order for us all to learn lessons. And those people who are suffering really horrible things here now, the people who put forth this theological theory say that those people actually chose those things ahead of time so that the rest of us and them could learn lessons from it. And they will say things like, well, we would never know how to respond with good towards them if they didn't go through those bad things, those horrible things. And they'll say that it was all meant to be. It's like, okay, so you want to go to those people, and I say this in humility, I don't mean to sound judgmental and angry, but the problem with that theology is that if a person were to go to those people who are suffering the bad things and say, hey, this was meant to be, you had to endure this so that I could learn how to respond to you with kindness or other lessons, right? They would say, well, we would never know how to respond well to these people, or we would never have the opportunity to act in love towards them if they weren't dealing with it in the first place. Therefore, it was meant to be. And these are all the lessons that we all need to learn. Therefore, it was all meant to be. It's just like, sure, if a person were to tell those people those things, those people would say, you guys are nuts. And the other problem with that kind of theology is that it implies that God, who is calling the shots, in His infinite wisdom, decided that yes, these people must suffer these things, i.e. it was meant to be, so that the rest of us can learn from it. Which means that, according to that theology, well, God predestines people to come here and suffer bad things. Which is complete bad theology. Why? Because it causes people to not trust God. If God were like that, I wouldn't trust Him. Not for a second. And the people who suffer those bad things, they'll be like, oh, you mean God predestined me to suffer this? You mean it was meant to be? And their trust in God is destroyed. I mean, they can say, oh, I still choose to trust God, but they're still human, and like, that will fall apart. Their pious looking decision to, I'm still going to trust God even though He predestined me to suffer, right? It just doesn't work. Now somebody will say, oh, we were called to suffer for Christ's sake, but that's a totally different thing. Being allowed or called to suffer with Christ is completely different. That's the way Christ suffered because the world hated Him, and we get to join in that as we identify with Him, right? Then oftentimes the world persecutes us as well. That's what that verse is talking about. I'm not saying that all the suffering in the world God himself or Christ predestined it, right? For some theological lesson for the rest of us. That's just silliness. So, once again, any theology that causes anybody to not trust God is bad theology, because then that prohibits and inhibits love with God. And love with God is always his ultimate prime first goal for all of us, i.e., the greatest commandment. Thank you, and have a nice day.